Hi there, today we're talking about a book that is incredibly popular, unlike me. This book is talked about a lot. It's not necessarily a new book, it's not a modern book at all, however, people are still reading it to this day and people are still talking about it. It's highly influential for the horror genre, which is a genre that I am very new to reading, but I'm so glad that this is one of the first horror books that I've picked up and read, and this is The Shining by Stephen King. What an influential author. This guy is talked about everywhere. And The Shining also has a movie adaptation as well that is also talked about, but I have not actually watched it yet. It is on my list to watch now that I've read the book, but today we are reviewing the book and the book only. So I hope that you enjoyed this video. Let's get on with it. So to start off, I just want to say the first portion of this video will contain no spoilers at all, so don't worry if you've not read this book, you can still watch the first half of this video. However, the second half will contain spoilers. I'll give you a heads up when we're going on to that part. This is the second Stephen King novel that I have read, and the first one was Salem's Lot, which I also did do a review of on my channel. It was okay, however with The Shining, I feel like this is completely opposite. To put it simply, in terms of my general thoughts about this book, I felt like the pacing was spot on. Like, I didn't feel like any parts were slow at all. Even when there were parts where not that much was going on in terms of action, it was still very tense. Like, I think that's the thing with this book, there's just underlying tension throughout all of it, and it was gripping to read. This is my favourite Stephen King novel that I've read so far. Obviously I have only read two, so that's not really that great of a statement. But it's going to be hard for something to top this, because this has set the standard for Stephen King very, very high. I do want to read more King books, but this so far has been absolutely incredible. So what is The Shining about? Here's a little synopsis for you. We have a main character called Jack who has been employed as the caretaker for the Overlook Hotel to man it during its off season. So this is through the autumn and the winter up to the spring. So there are no guests in the hotel, Jack is just going to be living there. He does take his wife Wendy and his 5-year-old son Danny, who are living in the hotel over the darker months and the darker seasons. It is very clear, very early on, the Overlook Hotel is sus. It's a very haunting, chilling place. Lots of stuff goes down, lots of spooky, scary stuff goes down, and the family are presented with lots of challenges that they have to face. On top of that, 5-year-old son Danny also has some supernatural abilities where he is able to sense other people's thoughts and their minds, and he's also able to see images from the past and the future. That's quite some heavy stuff going on for a 5-year-old boy. So what the family first thought would just be a little holiday over the winter actually ends up becoming a fight for survival. And that is The Shining in a nutshell. Let's move on to my non-spoilery thoughts. Firstly, I adore the different perspectives. So each chapter is based on the viewpoint of somebody else. So mainly the family, mainly revolving around Jack, Danny and Wendy. You do also get some instances where there are perspectives from somebody called Halloran. But the main thing that I want to discuss here is the writing style. I have never read a writing style like this. Maybe I'm just inexperienced in reading horror books, but the writing style in this is one of a kind for me personally. Basically, the person's perspective that you are reading the chapter from, their thoughts interrupt paragraphs. So you could be reading a paragraph that's describing an environment or an object, and then in the middle of that paragraph it will be interrupted by that person's thoughts, which is exactly what does happen. Like, our thoughts are interrupting us all the time. I've had about 100 thoughts since starting this video, probably more. But I just thought it was so cool that the thoughts were written in that way. I thought it was such an interesting writing style. I absolutely loved it. And it added to character depth because you are reading word for word what is going through that person's mind. So rather than just experiencing the world through their eyes and just seeing what they're seeing, you're also thinking what they're thinking. This was such a strength to this book. Like, the writing, I just loved it. Coffee break. If anyone's interested, which you're probably not, I'm drinking orange and cranberry coffee. It is just as amazing as it sounds. I would say that I enjoyed Danny's perspective the most, and he is also, in my opinion, the most likeable character. I think the reason why his paragraphs are so interesting is because he's only 5 years old, so there's a lot of stuff that he doesn't understand that the reader will understand. There's a lot of references, some dialogue that he picks up from other people that he doesn't understand because he's only 5, but from us reading it as an adult, we understand what that person is referring to or what they mean. Again, I think that's just a strength. Like, it's such a talent to be able to do that. I also liked how we experienced Danny's supernatural abilities. I thought that was really well embedded into this book as well. And again, he doesn't fully understand his abilities. So he'll experience something or he'll sense something, but we'll also get a lot of confusion from him too, just as we're probably feeling confused about it. I also particularly liked the character of Wendy. I do feel like there were times where she's very, very vulnerable. She's a very vulnerable character. She is likeable, but she's just quite fragile. And I think throughout this book, she's just trying to be a good mother to Danny. That's all she's trying to do, and factors outside of her control are interfering with that all the time, but she's constantly trying. Can't say the same for Jack. I also really found it quite wholesome how Wendy also tries to understand Danny's abilities. There are times at the start of the book where she might be a little bit in denial of what he can do, but overall, towards the end of the book, she is trying her hardest to understand him, even though she'll never grasp the full extent of what he's experiencing. And she does love her son, but there's also that hint of jealousy because she's putting all this effort into her son, but it's quite clear that Danny prefers Jack and Danny is more drawn to Jack. So there is also that like disappointment and that disheartened feeling from Wendy, knowing that she's not the number one in her son's life, but he is the number one in hers. I think another strength of this book is the character development, particularly with Jack. His personality changes drastically throughout the course of this book, and it's very clear to see stage by stage. It was so interesting. I will delve into this a little bit more later because there's some specific parts that I want to talk about that are very spoilery, so I won't do that here. But his personality and his characteristics change drastically from start to finish, and he has the most character development. Not in a good way. I think it's because he progressively gets more and more unlikable as the book goes by, but that shift is very clear to see, and it was really entertaining. I also think that this is a great book for the winter seasons, which we are now in if you are watching this video as it's uploaded, because the book goes through the seasonal change of autumn to winter. And a large portion of this book is set in the snow. There's like a snowstorm, snowy mountains, just very snowy vibes. So if you're into seasonal reading, which a few of you have commented before agreeing that you also are into seasonal reading, just like I am, then this is a good one for this time of year. I would recommend it. And another point that I also just want to talk about is the partnership between Danny and Halloran. That was so wholesome, and that was one of my favourite parts of the book, was this link that they both have. It was absolutely adorable, and there were some moments where I felt like Halloran was being more of a father figure to Danny than his actual father Jack was. And the effort that he goes into to try and protect Danny from the danger that he encounters is very clear to see. I also think that out of all the characters in the book who are going to understand Danny's supernatural abilities, it is Halloran. And he just seems like he genuinely cares about the little boy, and that was so, so heartwarming. And it added like a warm and fuzzy feel to the book, even though this is a horror, even though this is a thriller, even though there's some crazy stuff that goes on in this book, there was that underlying warm and fuzzy feeling because of that partnership between Danny and Halloran. So that's probably all of my non-spoilery thoughts. So I'm going to do some spoilers now, and then at the end I'll give my final thoughts and conclusions and my rating out of 5 stars. So if you want to skip the spoiler section, that is fine. Go to roughly about 2 minutes before the end of the video where I'll be talking about my general thoughts. But let's move on to spoiler discussion. Oh, the coffee's kicking in. So in this section of the video, I'm just going to talk about some of the particular chapters and scenes that I felt were really important for me to discuss, some of them that I felt were really impactful, really strong. Very, very early on in the book, there is a paragraph from Jack's perspective, I think it is, where it describes in great detail the meaning behind the sound of Jack breaking his son's arm. So very early on we learn that there was an unfortunate incident whereby Jack was not very kind to his son, let's be honest, and it does lead to Danny's arm breaking. Now there is a very strong, impactful paragraph where the sound of the arm breaking means something to Jack. Like, he's describing it and likening it to like a breaking pencil or snapping kindling. I just think it was such a unique descriptive style. I can picture exactly what sound that would have been in my head, but for Jack to compare that to something so minor like a pencil, it was just a really unique descriptive style. And it also, again, makes us hate Jack right from the get-go. I did not like Jack. There was also a chapter which I knew as soon as I read it was a massive bout of foreshadowing. It's the chapter where Wendy and Danny are in the car and they're discussing whether or not they should leave the hotel. They said that they can leave Jack there, but if they're gonna leave, it needs to be before the snow hits, because once the snow hits, they will be trapped because they're up on a mountain and, you know, there's no way for them to get out. But then, reluctantly, they decide to stay over the winter. I knew as soon as I read the chapter that that was the worst decision that they could possibly make. That was a huge sense of foreshadowing that they should not have stayed at the hotel. And it was one of those moments where I just wanted to shake Wendy and say, take your son. You have seen enough at this point in the book for you to warrant leaving. So much has happened already prior to that point. Why are you staying? It was so frustrating to see how dumb she was. I think that's it. She's very vulnerable and she's a little bit foolish in some of the decisions that she made. And she was far too loyal to her husband, as she shouldn't have been. He should have lost her loyalty long ago. I mentioned earlier about how you can see Jack's character development throughout the course of this book. What I specifically mean is that you can see Jack getting progressively more and more insane as each chapter goes by. He has the most development because he turns the most insane. And when you read his exact thought processes, you realise that this dude is messed up at this point. He is so unlikable. He's constantly manipulating Wendy and Danny for his own gain. He completely loses his mind by the end of the book. And it was such an entertaining but frustrating process to go through because he just made wrong choice after wrong choice. And what I liked about this book was that when you think the danger is going to be like the ghosts and like the haunting of the hotel, the actual true danger is Jack. One particular thing that I noticed, which I absolutely loved, I noticed this straight away, and again I thought it was such a strength to this book, I loved it, was in Jack's mind he has conjured up this character called Lloyd, who I believe off the top of my head is the barman who is serving him this like fake alcohol. Obviously the alcohol doesn't exist, there isn't any in the hotel, but Jack thinks that he is being served drinks by this fake guy called Lloyd. The first time that Jack encounters Lloyd, Lloyd doesn't speak. There is no dialogue for Lloyd. Everything that he does is said in statements. So it would be like, Lloyd shook his head. Lloyd said he did not know this. It's very plain, it's very, like, Lloyd isn't a person, he doesn't have any character to him, he doesn't have any personality, he's just a figment of Jack's mind. Then loads of stuff happens in the book and then we revisit Lloyd at a later date, except this time when Jack sees Lloyd, he is a fully fledged character, like he can speak. He is written about in the same way that any other character would be. Jack speaks to him, he speaks back. Whereas previously, Jack would speak to him and he wouldn't speak back. It would just be a descriptive statement in one sentence about what he did. Almost as though he has become real. And I just felt like that was great. And that was evidence in the fact that Jack had completely lost his mind, he'd completely succumbed to the hotel, he had lost all sense of reality. I also think that the epilogue was pure perfection, and it wasn't what I was expecting, but it is what I wanted to happen. The way that this book ends is everything that I hoped it would be, but didn't think it would be, and I was very pleasantly surprised. I wasn't expecting a happy ending, and although like there's still so much danger for Wendy and Danny in Halloran and they've been through so much, they've been traumatised, Wendy essentially has a broken body at the end of it, they've been through so much, but it was as happy of an ending as you're gonna get based on what they've been through. The epilogue was written so beautifully that I did actually have my eyes watering when I read it. I just thought it was a stunning end to this book. It's as though Wendy, Dani and Halloran finally found peace, and I think that was everything that I wanted for those characters, because all three of them are so likeable and they always had good intentions. I'm not gonna lie, at some point I thought that either Halloran or Wendy was going to die in this book, but they didn't, and that was more emotional for me and more impactful, the fact that they didn't die. And I think in order to make an effective book, you don't always need a main character to die. So let's move on to my conclusions. Overall, if you couldn't tell already, I absolutely loved this book. I would read it again. I felt it was very well paced. It didn't feel slow to me. I was hooked by it. It was gripping. I enjoyed every chapter. You had a good mix of characters that you like, that you're rooting for, and then characters that you don't like and that you absolutely hate. It was creepy, it was weird, but it was easy to follow. It wasn't too confusing. I think you learn a lot about the supernatural abilities and you start to understand a lot more about that as well. Dani is by far my favourite character, but I did also like Halloran and Wendy as well. The ending was incredible. I thought it was a great end to the book. I think it needed to happen. There's also reference to the past a lot and things that happened before this book takes place, which just adds to the character depth. And I just thought it was incredible. I really, really enjoyed this book so much. I'm so glad I read it, and it is my favourite Stephen King book so far, although I have only read 2. Overall, I rated this a 4 out of 5 stars. So that is my review for The Shining by Stephen King. If you've read this book, what did you think to it? I'd love for you to leave me a comment and let me know what your thoughts and opinions were so that we can keep this conversation going. Thanks for sticking with me in today's video. I really do appreciate it. If you enjoyed this review, please make sure to give it a thumbs up to let me know that you did. And in the description box, I will leave links to some other relevant videos that I've done that I think you might enjoy if you enjoyed this one. So make sure to check that out. If you like my content and you want to see more from me, then please subscribe because it's free and it means that you can see my videos a lot easier. I will see you next time, or rather you'll see me, and I hope that you have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye for now.